Um, so we are currently living in the age of an industrial revolution, where the world economy is undergoing rampant technological and digital changes. Needless to say that advances in technology have massively impacted our lives collectively. So while nations are increasingly resorting to digitization of their respective economies, it is also important to look at how it will impact diplomatic relations. So with the emergence of AI, greater scrutiny is necessary because it will have a significant impact on international relations, such as putting new topics in the international agenda, challenging geostrategic relations, serving as a tool for diplomats and negotiators, and creating new opportunities and concerns about protecting human rights. So, given that India is an emerging economy, we have immense potential to revolutionize our country with the help of other economies. So, India can potentially collaborate with its neighbors and countries from the West to leverage its digital economy. Through this interview, we seek to explain to our young readers and viewers the intricacies of diplomacy and the future of international relations in the hands of automation and digitization.
So
Yeah.
today,
Yes,
to help
please.
justify the concern and the connection between international relations and digitization, we have a very special guest and one of the best minds in the field of economic diplomacy here with us today. Ambassador Ravi Thapar is a professor of practice in international affairs and law, as well as the executive dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs. Professor Thapar comes with over 36 years of professional experience and has served as India's envoy to multiple nations like Lebanon, New Zealand, Western Samoa, and Niue, to name a few. He was assigned as the Chargé d'Affaires in Suriname and Consul General of India in Milan, Italy. He retired from the IFS in the capacity of secretary and is currently enrolled as an advocate with the High Court of Delhi. Professor Thapar has also served as Additional Secretary in Counterterrorism for the Ministry of External Affairs and has held dialogues with nations such as the US, UK, France, China, Italy, and many others. Earlier during his career, Professor Thapar served as Joint Secretary, Head of Department for the Latin American and Caribbean region in the Ministry of External Affairs, and also as Director of Multilateral Economic Relations. Now, these are just a few of the many achievements that he has had in his distinguished career. Arthaniti takes immense pleasure in welcoming him today. Professor, it is wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us.
Thank you, Ms. Ruchi and Mr. Akrit, for those kind sentiments. Like you, I am just an active and a very keen student of international relations, with, of course, a special passion for diplomacy and economic development and prosperity, especially, of course, with special focus on India. Now, the theme which you've picked up, and you, I think, have two, three ideas in that. One, of course, with artificial intelligence, India being hooked into that network more extensively, how will it impact on our international relations, diplomatic ties with other countries? That's one. Two, how do we see perhaps the Indian nation, Indian people, Indian economy connecting with the big world wide web in a more dynamic, in a more, I would say, escalated or higher orbit? Well, my response, my first response to these, shall we say, introductory aspects is very, very positive. We are a very smart nation. We've been blessed with a lot of capabilities, especially in the STEM disciplines. I don't see why our scientists and engineers, our IT experts, and other professionals should be left out of this wonderful excitement, which is the artificial intelligence realm, which is being now, conjured and now being carved out in the international arena. In fact, let's take cue from what's been happening since the last 1.5 years. These have been very tough and trying times for everybody, including India. We have a very large population and we have very large concerns. We have immense concerns about them, about their welfare. And during this time, we have not stepped back in terms of diplomatic relations. In fact, we have been as active, even at the level of Honorable Prime Minister, who has addressed summit meetings through online, and internet. This is the wonderful thing about digitization, which you have referred to. It does enable a virtual connect in fact, on a seamless 24/7 ongoing basis. I think this is excellent because in the present era, when we are so much tied up, connected seamlessly, the economies have also become interdependent. What happens in one country could impact the global supply chain, which could have consequences on recipients and participants in the global supply chain, which we are talking about. We can pick up any. And I dare say that during COVID times, we could not meet physically. Some of our diplomatic dialogues could not be held. Of course, there is no substitute for human interaction, personal asides. Those are special, moments when you'd like to get the ear of your interlocutor on a particular aspect. Those are very special asides. All of us have engaged in that. I have done that. When you want to step aside from the multilateral plenary and move to one side of the room during the coffee break, and then try and get your point of view across. Those are very special moments. But then, even without that, I think we've continued our dialogue, whether it's at the G20 or special participation at the G7 and other such dialogues, even recently, at the UN meetings, etc. So I don't see the artificial intelligence or digitization really being a bottleneck. Yes, one thing is there. Whatever we are saying, whatever we do project in the virtual world is being monitored, is being recorded in some servers somewhere. And what we say, therefore, and what we do and how we come across on a particular issue can come back or be played back, replayed. And sometimes if there has been an utterance which has been made in one of those unguarded moments, yes, it can be slightly embarrassing and can upset that dialogue, diplomatic dialogue. We could have made in an unguarded moment, we could have made a comment about a particular country. And if that is hacked, that's the other issue, privacy. If that is hacked somehow, after all artificial intelligence is being generated by supercomputers and servers all over the world. Now it's being recorded. And if there is some hacking somehow into those machines, and those moments of privacy or an unguarded kind of concept has leaked across, it can be embarrassing. So we will have to be a little careful. And I think our diplomats, our officials, our political leadership anyway is very, very professional. We're very circumspect. We're one of the best foreign services in the world. And we are not, in fact, too many. The overall number of diplomats, all streams probably would be in the range of about 2,200, including different streams, those who have been promoted or those who have been recruited directly into the foreign service. And in comparison, I'm talking of the total number, not those who are directly recruited under the UPSC. There's one stream and then there's another promotee stream. So my point is this, that in comparison with other developing countries, other nations, developed nations, we have a very small foreign service, but because it is small, we have to be professional. So normally our officials are, and that's how they advise the leadership, also political leadership. I don't see that as really a bottleneck. I see that as giving us a better connect. It gives us, excellent opportunity. For example, there's always the inconvenience of going to the airport, going through the security and getting onto a flight, upsetting your personal schedules. I mean, on the other hand, you have just slotted, a number of meetings during your working week, and you can have consecutive dialogues with Russia, with Japan, with Australia, New Zealand, with Brazil and US, Canada, all in 1 week. And you couldn't do that really physically. So, and you also have this wonderful thing where all the leadership, all the political leadership, or it could be the industry leadership, it could be the economic icons, it could be the entrepreneurs, all of them are collectively able to meet you on a virtual forum. And we have this wonderful software And it's almost like having a physical meeting. So I think digitization for me is an immense tool, is a very positive tool. And we're anyway a software power, a software superpower, if I may be allowed to use that term. We have wonderful engineers who are giving solutions to the whole world. I mean, we give customized solutions. We are being recruited. I mean, we have the best teams in Google, we have in Facebook. You see some of the CEOs, whether it is Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella, see how Indian professionals have blossomed. So we can't be left out of this excitement. India has to be part of this whole wonderful activity which is going on. Of course, I have some other points also which we can take up later in this dialogue. So on to your first, as regards your first question, both in terms of diplomacy, international relations, and in fact, making sure that our scientific community, science and technology innovation community, it should connect with the counterparts and talented interlocutors and centers of excellence all over the world. I think I would say that this is a very, very exciting moment, and it helps us to overcome as a country with shortage of resources. I mean, we can't pay for business class or airfares to distant nations for everybody. But look what artificial intelligence and digitization enables. We have a vast population, and all those people can participate virtually. They don't have to get onto business planes. So it's actually economical also for the country, As a developing country, we are able to save on airfares. And then the hotel bills. Look at the bills and the taxi fares. So you add up all these logistical expenses, and then you also keep into consideration the fact that if from a diverse nation, everybody should be represented. Naturally, we have a number of experts from different states, from different towns and cities, and from different centers of excellence. So rather than pay airfares and getting them all onto the plane and making them go into hotels and then come back, etc. One, it is tiring, physically demanding, expensive, etc. And so all this is wonderfully, I think, tackled or addressed by artificial intelligence, rather digitization. Artificial intelligence, of course, is a different realm. It means it's used for robotics. I have used that term interchangeably. Strictly, no. Strictly, I'm talking of digitization. Artificial intelligence, of course, for India, and I don't think, because you also use artificial intelligence in the context of international relations, I don't think that is what you meant. You probably meant more of digitization, the digital connect in international relations. Artificial intelligence would actually be helpful. For example, you need a supercomputing device to look at all the UN resolutions and to analyze what has been said on a particular issue. So you have a supercomputing device, almost an artificial intelligence device, which can immediately give you a resultant output on the computer screen. And so you are able to, therefore, extrapolate trends. So there's a dialogue on sustainable development goals. There's a dialogue on climate change. There's a dialogue on counterterrorism. There's a dialogue on poverty alleviation. There's a dialogue on gender equality in the UN. And so you want these quickly. Suppose the Secretary General or some diplomats quickly wants, a synthesis, complete summary of all this. Well, artificial intelligence can help the UN. Artificial intelligence can also help India, and it can also help all the other participants in this whole web of artificial intelligence, because supercomputers will do the job. All right. So to that extent, I would say robotics can be useful in international relations. Of course, robotics is more relevant. It would be more relevant in hospitals, in healthcare, in security operations, where you don't want to lose human life, where there could be mine sweeping, etc. And it's dangerous for our troops and people to be there. You could have robots do this. And of course, you can also use, of course, at the ordinary level, you as a citizen or as a student, we all use search engines. We all use Google Scholar. We all use other search engines in the academic world. So behind all these search engines is artificial intelligence. There are supercomputers which are doing the job. Even Google Translate. I've been in so many countries. I don't speak all the languages. I mean, I speak Arabic. I have a smattering of Spanish, etc. But occasionally you have to go to Google Translate and hear the dialogue, and it's giving you out. It cuffs up the the Spanish or the Portuguese equivalent. So I think artificial intelligence, to that extent, again promotes international exchanges. But the only issue I would caution in this whole process, of course, is privacy, hacking, and misuse. And there could be, therefore, if that happens, it would lead to cybersecurity problems eventually. And if there is cybersecurity, that can lead to misuse, for example, in financial banking transactions, and a lot of personal data could be compromised. So these are, of course, some of my reactions or responses to your huge, I would say, query about various aspects of digitization and artificial intelligence.
Professor, I think we're minutes into this conversation, but I think you've already given us so much to think about. But then for whoever's viewing this, we'd just like to start with a very basic. So when we looked at diplomacy over the centuries, it's mostly been from a very militaristic perspective. But I think from the beginning of the 20th century, I think economic diplomacy has become a very important aspect of the art of diplomacy. And now today, our world's run by computers, and all financial transactions just happen with a single click. Now, since it's your area of expertise, how would you define the term economic diplomacy, especially since we're living in an age of AI in the 21st century now?
Yeah, the artificial intelligence, just again, an immediate response. Artificial intelligence is just one aspect, or one tool, or one facility for strengthening economic diplomacy. Regarding the concept or definition, if I go into academic or professor mode, I'll just say this has really come up in the recent decades. Diplomacy at one time, the only parallel I can think of, which I've also mentioned in class, is when in the good old days you had kings and emperors, and envoys were placed in the courts of those kings. The envoy would, of course, be a very important emissary for building up goodwill, cultural relations, and other things. But he also looked at trade aspects. Every envoy, at the back of his mind, had this important concern of furthering his country's economic, commercial aspects. I mean, I would use more commercial, trade, not economic at that point so much. At that point, there were, of course, thinkers like John Maynard Keynes and other economists, of course, doing their analysis. But for diplomats, it was more a commercial or a trade inter-exchange. And we've had that, of course, progress. We then, of course, came into, let's say, we graduate to the World War I, World War II. And actually that is after this World War II, when there was immense destruction, etc., that some of these European and Western, USA and other powers decided that this has been too much and let's all now go in. There's a kind of remorse and the world must get onto a new track, and it should be based on economic development and prosperity. And that's when the Bretton Woods institutions were established. And then there were efforts, by the US, some of its old programs. You've heard of Marshall Plan, and you've heard of other initiatives where they try to start reaching out to, to other countries, developing countries, helping them get onto economic growth. Now, if you were to summarize, therefore, commercial diplomacy, trade, exchanges have today, of course, all graduated, and economic diplomacy, in fact, is now the new concept. And if I were to define, this concept today, I would say economic diplomacy is specific to that area or discipline or expertise which is used as a tool and a mechanism by all countries all over the world to further, develop, upgrade their economic development and prosperity in the country. And because we are an connected world in globalization, and because we are all interdependent, our economies are now all connected, the players, I would submit, principal players in economic diplomacy do remain the state, the nation states, and the countries, and the governments. But because of the seamless connectivity which has happened, non-state actors like the industry, associations, entrepreneurs, NGOs, civil society, the science and technology community, businessmen, commentators, consultants, lawyers, all these are now possible stakeholders, and they can influence, therefore, the outcomes of economic diplomacy. So if there is an initiative being discussed or a concept being discussed, for example, climate change or multilateral trade, etc., in the WTO, it can impact on the fortunes and the future of the domestic population. I have always given this example in class, how to begin with, India held back for quite some time till 1999, etc., protection which is given for pharmaceutical, products. We held back patent protection for pharmaceutical products till almost 1999, under the TRIPS and other regime, which is required. And we only gave patent protection for pharmaceutical processes. Now that helped India with its teeming millions and huge, goals of getting medical care or life-saving medicines available for its teeming millions. We were able to get into reverse engineering processes, and through those reverse engineering, we could make the same paracetamol through another process. So actually that helped in building up a huge pharmaceutical generic, industry. And today India is one of the biggest pharmaceutical generic manufacturers in the world. And the beauty is that we are able to supply medicines not only for our immense population at low cost, but we are also able to export. And therefore, we are also benefiting a lot of the other nations. And that's why, even in COVID, we are being called the pharmacy of the world. So this is how I would submit that, a decision at the international or multilateral level could impact on the domestic health and domestic industry. So therefore, the stakeholders and the actors in economic diplomacy principally remain the state and the nation states and the governments, but the participants and the players now are also non-state actors, and because they can contribute and impact on the outcomes of economic diplomacy. So economic diplomacy, in fact, I always say that in my class also, has assumed, I would say, priority status, has assumed paramount importance for all nations. Every country, whatever be its political system of governance, wants to keep its population happy, wants to keep its population in a state of economic well-being and development and bring prosperity. Now, you can't do this alone. Everybody doesn't have everything. Every country has some strengths. So in this era of interconnectivity, it does make sense to have global supply chains. So you would like to therefore benefit from other people's strengths. You'd like to get technology, you'd like to get foreign direct investment, you'd like to get innovation, you'd like to give exposure to your engineers, to the best scientists and engineers in the world. They could be a better technology, they could be more economical means of production, or they could be a more green technology, for example. So for all this, therefore, you do need to connect with other people. And the leadership in every country is very keen that we should not, that its population, that particular country's leader, whomever we may talk about, is very keen that his country or her country should not remain behind in this whole process. And therefore, they will use all the techniques, the tools, to further their country's economic and commercial interests. And I would summarize all this, the net result of all these efforts, initiatives, as I say it in class, whether these are formal or informal, dialogues or formal agreements, all these can be clubbed under the concept of economic diplomacy. And I would give it even more importance, even more priority, in fact, than political exchanges, because at the end of the day, when you strike a friendship as a leader of a particular country with another leader, at the end of the day, it gives you an entry for your country's goods and services. It gives you an introduction. And therefore, if you want to sustain that friendship, ultimately the economies of the two countries, the peoples of the country must connect. And economic diplomacy does help in all that. So that's a very, well, it turned out to be an exhaustive explanation. I started from the definition. I hope it addresses your query and concerns and your viewership also. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for such a explanative and broad definition of economic diplomacy. Just to shift our focus to the Industrial Revolution part of it, you've already told us about your positive outlook on Industrial Revolution 4.0.
Yes.
But how exactly can we inculcate diplomatic relations in this sphere? How will it impact diplomacy? And more importantly, what sort of transition can we expect in terms of global supply chain in terms of that?
Yeah, I've already spoken at length about the international relations and diplomacy. So I don't think I need to refer again to that. But yes, about the, significance for our economy and for our citizens and people, Indian industry. Again, we should not remain behind in this initiative. India has this, as an academic, I'd like to submit, India has this wonderful duality in its entity. We are a very developed nation in many ways. We have immense scientific and technological awareness and expertise. We are a world power in that kind of competence. I mean, look at the kind of space achievements our space research organization. We look at the missile technology which we have. We're second to none, and we are still progressing every day on a daily basis. I mean, I remember as a very young diplomat, I used to say in business seminars, because those were old days, and I'm not talking of today. There were some concerns by security experts in the US, and they thought that we would be using supercomputer technology, for maybe wrong or negative purposes for defense, etc. equipment. So the supercomputers were denied to us, and India's, scientists, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing in Pune, for example, they went ahead and designed their own supercomputers, the Param, through massively parallel computing devices. So we gave the Param concept, and then we not only manufactured our own supercomputers, we started exporting to other countries. I mean, that's the kind of ingenuity which India has. So I think it would be very unfair to deny our talented people, our talented community, that opportunity. I think we must participate vigorously, and therefore, coming back to my point, we are having a kind of dualistic entity. On the one hand, we have a very important aspect, which is almost like any developed country, the competence, the core competence and skills of our science and technology community. And we should continue to foster and encourage and facilitate that. On the other hand, we do have an immense population, and shall we say, who are still unfortunate, 80 million to 100 million, who are still not very sure about their future livelihood and about their family and their children. Maybe they don't have enough means even though they want to, for educating their children, etc. So these are very important concerns which we have. So I think when we bring in or connect with Industrial Revolution 4.0, which is the Internet of Things, which is about automation, It will automatically, of course, bring more efficiency in all our processes. It will bring in, it will bring us on a par with global manufacturing processes. Obviously, you will have, when you have automation, etc., you'll have more precision. There'll be more calibration. Today when science and technology, I don't have to mention this. The wafer chips, the submicron, which is many, times smaller than a hair. I mean, that's the kind of technology which goes in making a semiconductor chip. So that's the kind of precision, and then laser and other concepts which come in. With all this automation, naturally, India's industry will start looking up. And we will have to keep up with the world, because otherwise, how will we be able to export, and how will we be able to upgrade in terms of efficiency and technology? So we must participate in this. This is as regards the industry. There is, of course, the other side, and I come to my other point, that there is a very large section of our people who are still not economically secure. So when we are bringing in automation, we will have to take care that a certain segment of people who was employed in some kind of economic livelihood, it might get displaced. I would remind you, you were very young at that time, or maybe not born or whatever. Earlier on, there's a huge resistance, for example, in the public sector banks like State Bank, etc., on computerization. Computerization of the banks, it was resisted. Even in any other fields, it was resisted by the labor unions, because they lose jobs. And today I'm proud to say, I used to say that as a diplomat, not only do we have the cheapest mobile, and the best telecom technologies in India, but look at the apps. I mean, I have been doing for my aged mother, some of her finances, which I control, on the State Bank of India YONO app. I mean, on my phone, even when I was ambassador to Panama or Costa Rica, when I was abroad or in New York, transiting through New York. So I could just do it with 4G, even while I'm in the cab, So through the mobile app, I could manage, financial transactions. So that's the kind of automation which has now been brought into our banking structure. So automation can be very useful from the economic point of view, and it must be encouraged. However, we had some issues with the labor unions, etc., and therefore we had to rehabilitate them. So we'll have to make sure that they are trained, that they are rehabilitated in some sector. So automation must not lead to displacement of workers and personnel. This is something which will have to go side by side. Otherwise, the other issue, of course, is, which I am a little skeptical and personally very careful, is about, I have, for example, when I bought a washing machine last year, a new up-to-date, it's a smart machine, and I can have an application, I can download an application, I can program when it runs, there's a dryer, etc. You can do all these things today. You are, suppose you're out of Delhi and you're going to fly back from Chennai or from Kanyakumari or whatever, and you want your machine, you just put in your linen or whatever, your laundry in the machine, and everything is ready, the soap, and you just, through your mobile app, you can run it. And by the time you come, your laundry is ready. But the issue is, then that means the internet is right in the house. Today also, the internet is in. The cameras are in your house. And if this is hacked, if this Internet of Things also is hacked, there's a lot of compromise of privacy. So the only caveats which you'd like to add in this engagement or dialogue with you young people is, as you are going to deal with it, obviously. We will be living with these. And I know, for example, Alexa, please switch this on. My relatives, children, abroad, whatever, So Siri, hey Siri, can you turn the lights off? Hey Siri, can you dim this? Hey Siri, can I have the music louder? Hey Siri, can you lock the door? So that's the kind of thing which is there. And I've seen it. I've been, in Silicon Valley houses, etc., relatives, friends, children, whatever. So I've seen this at play. The only thing is, I always question. I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm a little reluctant personally, because the issue is this. I'd like to be very sure that there is no snooping or eavesdropping going on. You know heard recently about surveillance, etc., electronic surveillance. So if this gets into the hands of a wrong kind of group, it's not only about privacy. At a national level, it can raise an immense security problem for your country, because cybersecurity is, of course, one very major concern. In this Internet of Things, I mean, if someone is eavesdropping from another nation which doesn't wish the best for you and your citizens, so they can do a lot of things. They can do a lot of things. There could be, there's been, I mean, this is like a sci-fi, of course. We almost go into sci-fi. I mean, one has heard of very, very high frequency sound waves being used to damage, maybe some parts of the human anatomy. One has heard all this. And now if this is while you're sleeping and someone is, getting into your Internet of Things and somehow this gets in. I mean, technology can lead to anything. And, if you lose, therefore, what am I coming to? That's the core question as you, the youngsters. What I'm leading to is this, that we should not, with this Internet of Things and this huge digitization, and with this huge artificial intelligence, which we are all plunging into, we should not lose sight of our human, human side of our personality. We should not lose our balance. A good human being, we've all heard, is a balanced personality who has qualities of head, intelligence, and the heart. I mean, there is something, about those poetry, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, Robert Frost. Or, William Wordsworth, or Lord Tennyson's Brook, when he's talking of Mother Nature and all those beautiful scenes of Mother Nature. I mean, because then at the end of the day, it takes a tsunami and it takes a COVID and it takes other natural calamities to remind human beings that there is something else than just a mechanical, machine-oriented Kali Yuga, as they say in India, Kali Yuga, existence. It's not just about machines and, mechanics and physics and sciences. There is something beyond, perhaps, which gives balance to us. So we shouldn't lose that aspect of our personality. We should not become so mechanical that we forget that there is someone who's poor, there's someone who's needy, that there is someone who doesn't have opportunity, that they also deserve a hearing. In our quest of science and technology, in artificial intelligence, it's so unfortunate that the nation states, when they are in the UN, we are talking big things about sustainable development goals, poverty alleviation. And yet so many of our brethren, fraternal countries in Africa, they don't have enough to eat. And we have trillions of dollars in defense expenditure. And, each defense equipment company is trying to outshine the other. And each budget, including in our country, we are probably the third largest shopper of defense supplies in the world. We are going on this whole binge of creating defense preparedness, etc. And what an irony. These will get outdated. After 5 years, they will get outdated. Someone else will come up with a better technology, and then we will have to gradually phase them out. And on the other hand, if we were to use this whole expenditure for the betterment or uplift of mankind, would that not be better? That, of course, would bring me to another dialogue which is not connected with yours, which is about the UN system, the UN reforms. We have this whole thing in the Security Council monopolized by a few countries, whereas there are 193 members. So the attention of the world, we arrive at these lofty resolutions, about sustainable development goals, etc. So wonderful concepts, etc. And yet, the few trillions or billions, maybe, which we try to spend on these programs, look at the billions and trillions which are being wasted in infructuous warfare or in terrorism or in fighting with each other. I mean, we're not able to coexist. The irony is we have achieved so much of science and technology, and we're talking of artificial intelligence and digitization. The irony is we are at the zenith, or we are now at the acme of knowledge or whatever. We have such wonderful skills, and yet we are not able to coexist with each other. Is that not so ironical and so sad that we still are having I would say, a rather self-centered, almost a selfish approach about our particular welfare and not wanting to share this wonderful opportunity, which is human life, with everybody. So There must be more equitable sharing of wealth and resources, more democratization of knowledge, more democratization of economic opportunities. And therefore, if artificial intelligence can help in that, if international relations can be tethered and anchored using these as tools, if economic diplomacy will help in getting better resources to some of our poor countries, in Africa or other regions of the world, well, I would say that we have used these tools in a very productive and positive manner. So your young, audience, etc., may I all request you to please keep these ideas in mind and not lose your humanity, not lose your balance, benefit from these mechanical devices. Go and enjoy, those nice computing games. I've never played them. All those war games, etc., and the video games, etc. Game industry is one of the biggest industries in computing. Do all that on your mobiles, etc., but never lose your vision, because remember one thing: India does have a wonderful distinction of its own. We are a very tall leader in philosophy and spirituality. And I'm also very fond of saying to a lot of audiences that is that bent of mind, which is that abstract, connect with the abstract world and the bigger realm of things, which I think gives us some immense insights in software engineering. That's why we are so good, because that's why we are blessed with that wonderful intuition, or that ability to crunch those integers and numerals and all those zeros and all those software programs. I think that's how it is. So coming back to your point, automation, internet, wonderful. Industry must keep abreast with this, because we don't want to be left behind. We must progress. But at the same time, we will have to make sure that automation does not lead to displacement of workers and staff. We must make sure that the resources of the country are not just spent on the highest technology. The resources of the country have also to be spent for our poor people, because they also have to be upgraded. And in this whole experiment and initiative, they must also be part of it, because we must share this excitement. That is at the domestic level, national level, and I also talked to you at the international level, how there should be more equitable, more distributive justice of economic and wealth and economic opportunities. So that is a very broad kind of response to your third question. What more, sir? Tell me.
So I think we started off with economics, and then we went to discussing so many other things. And you also gave us such a beautiful life lesson at the end of it. And I absolutely agree, sir. I think in India's talent is definitely on the rise. But I think one point that you said which really stuck with me was the dichotomy, because we have a group of very talented scientists and engineers on one hand, and then some other people who are not so privileged in society, unfortunately. But which I think sort of brings me to one of the questions that I had, which is when we look at each country at the global level, we have countries which are specialists in a certain field. For example, we look at China in terms of its labor and how it's been rising, and then if you're looking at the US has semiconductors, aircrafts, and India also has many strengths with that regard. So I just wanted to know, what are some other key areas of our economy that we can focus on, which calls for partnerships in the digital arena, and what kind of economic outcomes can we expect if we decide to partner with countries at the global level in a way that it also benefits a common man in our country?
Yeah, we must, as I said, look at this whole exercise of modernizing our nation, ensuring food for all. As Gandhiji said, wipe every tear from every eye, and that kind of vision should continue to inspire us. But talking of the latest tools of S&T, artificial intelligence, industrial revolution 4.0, why that? I mean, space, sciences, and I believe that we've also become, since last year, members of the Big Alliance on Artificial Intelligence, etc. Now, I think it's very important to keep doing all these wonderful things, because like I told you, we have a dualistic kind of entity. We must remain in the top club of nations and continue to be recognized and get esteem and recognition for the wonderful achievements which our scientific technology and technical community is bestowing on us. We will have to do a little bit of maybe it can be done through digitization or supercomputing. We will have to, for example, I have sometimes felt, and I made this, I'm just giving you an example. In my diplomatic career, at one point, I did mention it to some of our political leadership that, one of the things which India is not very famous for is its, my tribe, which is the bureaucracy. And the kind of, I would say the kind of conservatism which the bureaucracy has. I mean, we love to put our country on the best possible path. They're very capable, very talented, much more talented than I could say of myself. People from the civil service, and now of course we have engineers and doctors and all kinds of people who join the civil service. But one thing which is there is the conservatism and the kind of reticence on taking risks, etc. And part of it is also because we need politically the protection and the assurance that if we are trying to be innovative and experimental, well, we won't be clobbered for it, and we won't be harmed, etc. Because there's always a risk when you get onto a new path. So I always said that we have to cut down the red tape. And coming to my main point, when there's a foreign technology or a multinationals, they are just not in a mood to spend time, waste time, as it were, going through various environmental clearances. And then it's not just this, I'm just giving you land, and then acquiring water, meter bill sanction, meter sanction, water sanction, laying down this. So that kind of thing, and then it's state level agencies, then the central level. So I used to say, I said at one point in a very important dialogue, I won't tell you where, I actually made that remark that, sir, if we were to kind of pick up some very, very key specific areas, and in all those areas, we kind of do simulated approvals, we take a project, maybe it's, I'm just giving infrastructure, steel, whatever, healthcare, whatever. We take that project, okay? We like, and I said we should emulate actually. We can't be like a McKinsey or like an Ernst & Young and, some of the Booz Allen or whatever, some of these companies, but at least we can emulate some of those practices. And what you should do is, in the government, public sector, for example, we can take a project, a very specific key area, and we do a simulation exercise. We actually, in fact, do all the approvals, environmental, power, we calculate the manpower requirement, capital, we even cast projections about the revenue and possible profits, etc. The indigenous component of technology, the foreign equipment, etc. We do all these calculations, okay? So we've done up a pretty comprehensive feasibility report. And we have this approval in principle. Please mark what I'm saying. In principle approval. It's not actual approval, but it's in principle. On the understanding that when the project goes on, kicks off, this will be approved. So then these approvals in principle, and the summary is given to our ambassadors and heads of mission. And then we do our breakfast meetings with venture capitalists and entrepreneurs abroad. So what will happen is, and we go through video conferencing, etc. We connect centers of excellence, etc. See, this is all digitization. The ambassador and the envoys and the commercial representatives. So they are connecting the foreign counterparts with the Indian counterparts. And we already have the in principle approval for the project. So look at the time of conception. So when the venture capitalist is ready, he'll say, okay, so the time of entry, from the time of entry to takeoff, probably will be 2 months or 3 months, because everything has already been approved in principle. So this is a good way, but we can do all this. I said, to do this, we need to be on a very, very, very competent, secure network where the ambassadors of our country, for example, can be connected on a secure digital network with the chief secretary of states, with other counterpart secretaries in the government of India and other senior officials and the Prime Minister's office, etc. And there is a kind of a digital file, we move a digital file. Besides the physical file, which can go in parallel, all the approvals, say the stakeholder ministry, if it's industry, for example, it's an industrial project, or if it's something with education, something with medicine, healthcare, so that stakeholder ministry will do the principal coordination, etc. And the digital file will be all inputted into the common interface, and the physical file can go by special messenger, physically, and the approvals will take place. So all this is how you could use digitization to speed up your approval processes. And therefore, when you're a foreign, you're a foreign multinational, you're running out of patience. This is how we can actually benefit and catch up with, you mentioned, for example, People's Republic of China, etc. You can catch up with competing countries and speed up your approval process, because this is one big bottleneck which is holding back foreign investment. And of course, we are already, insisting, the government of India is working very hard on, trying to digitize other things and transparency in other processes. So people can't just sit back on files, etc. So this is one thing. Now, I'll just give you a practical example of how we should get onto this digitization and use it. Now, some of the areas which you said alliances, which you mentioned, in the latest currents. Well, I would say, of course, software. We should not remain out of it, because we have software and IT. We have a very potential workforce. We should participate in it. It's a lot of business opportunities, billions of dollars of exports in software. We should continue. I think S&T, of course, because we cannot step back. We have to keep pace and current with latest technologies. This can be used in different fields, industry, medicine, wherever, agriculture, whatever. We must keep up with latest techniques. Industrial design. I think we cannot be manufacturing things of a different era. I mean, today we've gone from carburetor, in my time, I remember going to the service station and the person would open the jets. The fuel, goes through certain jets in the carburetor. All that was overtaken by fuel injectors. We don't have carburetors. And from carburetors, we now have progressed now to, other smart hybrid kind of things. And there's a computer device, there's a module, electronic module in the car, which is controlling all the functions. So it's not even tuning physically. I know when I took my car recently, he took a laptop, he plugged it into the system, and then he could check the emissions, the running of the car, the idling. I said, this is not giving me the best average, fuel average. So he kind of tweaked it, all through the laptop. He doesn't take a screwdriver like the old days and do all these things. So industrial design technology is very important. And of course, we are in a new era of electric vehicles, the Teslas and the Mahindras and the Tatas and Toyota and Suzuki wanting to go into an alliance. And we must have more capability, not just depend on one country, China, which is manufacturing most of the lithium-ion batteries. We must look at other technologies. There's also hydrogen, for example, fuel and all that which is going on. So this is very important. Healthcare is a very critical area, because India has a huge population. We need to keep up with latest and technologies. I'm just giving an example. They could be invasive surgery, or they could be laparoscopic, or they could be robotic surgery. And as well as me, that normal invasive surgery will take it'll take 4 days, 5 days. But with laparoscopic or robotic, it might take you 1 day. And that's the kind of technology. People are today going in for stent operations and coming out the next day. I mean, they're all able to resume their normal life. And this was not possible earlier. So it's technology. Medical technology, and of course, in medicines, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology. I mean, this is extremely important. Agriculture. We must have the best, kind of technologies. We are short of water. Water is going to be like gold for India, because we are our water table is going very low. We have to be very, very careful. We have to conserve rainwater, replenishment of water sources, how we have to save water harvesting. All these are technologies and techniques. Pollution, anti-pollution. We've just inaugurated a smog tower in Delhi. It's a new technology. It's a very interesting one. I don't know why we did not do it earlier. So we have such a problem because of, stubble burning, etc. in the winter months. So this is pollution. We must breathe healthy air. This is also very important. E-commerce. e-commerce. I mean, I just told my wife one of my flip bottles, water bottles with flip tops. I said, I just cracked one or something. Can you just look? She said we bought it in New Zealand or something. She said we bought it. I don't know. I said just look at Amazon. She ordered it last night. In the morning there were 3 bottles at my door. So e-commerce. I've ordered the best vacuum cleaners. I've ordered the best mobiles. Everything is just delivered. And in COVID time, this is extremely useful. So e-commerce. I would, of course, also here talk about blockchain technology. We still don't have the wherewithal about cryptocurrency, but ultimately the technology about blockchain, which is so wonderful, I mean, it's more secure. I think that should be also one of the areas where we should have alliances. So, of course, using all this, we are using part of it today also. We are teaching classes in General Global University online. We never step back in any manner. We are going business as usual. So if we can use technology in education, in dissemination of knowledge. I was just thinking, for example, you don't have teachers, you don't have a physical primary school, just put up a console in the village and let the children of the village assemble in that common area. And so you have a huge screen where the teacher is talking to the children, बच्चों अब आप 1 + 2 करो, 2 + 3 5 करो, उनको पूरी पाठशाला उनकी चल सकती है ना. We can have a full running class in Hindi, in Sanskrit, in agriculture, whatever science also, basic sciences. We can have classes for our agriculturists. We can talk to our farmers. So again, technology, e-commerce, digitization, all these alliances, I think we should participate. But of course, again, as I said, we should never forget that we have to make use of every cent and every rupee which we spend. And it should ultimately result in upgradation of our poor people. And there should be rehabilitation every year. 30, 40 million people should move up the economic and the social ladder. And I hope our country's economic growth rate again picks up, because we have been growing in the past at 7.5%. Currently, we are at about $3 trillion. And we are, it is projected that we will become 5 trillion in a few years, but we have a lot of catching up to do. And technology can really help. A futuristic bent of mind, a scientific temper, as they say, can help. And participation of the private sector, keeping all our people, our different segments of the population, taking all the communities and the states of India together, etc., and digitally trying to connect these talented people with counterparts abroad. I think that's the way forward for the country. And that's how we can benefit with digitization, artificial intelligence, and some of these concepts which Industrial Revolution 4 is bringing us or introducing us to.
Thank you so much for such an elaborate answer. And you've covered, I think, almost every area of our economy, and and how everyone can benefit, right from the common man to the industrialists. Now that we've spoken about the positive sides, how can we talk about the negative aspects of digitization? We've already touched upon it, but I want to ask you, how can, if there is data extraction taking place in economies around the world, what is the diplomatic process that can take place to prevent this?
Yeah, this is something where, again, more broad-based dialogue is necessary. Unfortunately, that is part of human personality, I would say. Everyone kind of looks to himself. And this, of course, from the person, it goes to the community, and from the community, it goes to the nation state. And we just want to look at ourselves and our particular interests. Sometimes we lose track and we lose sight of the broader significance for our entire race. Again, I'm tempted, because of my diplomatic, exposure, to refer to the UN and the multilateral processes. It's so unfortunate that because of, this constant tussle or tug of war, or the sensitivity that no one should transgress into my territory and I should get better opportunity, better advantage. Sometimes we lose sight of bigger goals and objectives. The issue is, and you mentioned 1 minute again. You talked about the security, the data extraction. Yes. So on data extraction, that's what I wanted to come to. Even from the UN, etc. You know, there has been, unfortunately, too much consideration being given to the commercial aspects. Multinational corporations. I used to be at one time additional secretary for counterterrorism, and you know, there is this question: your investigation agency has traced the whole crime or offense, maybe terrorism related, extremism, whatever, to some people, and they have been apparently in some chat, or you know, whether they use Signal or WhatsApp or Telegram, etc. Now the problem is you need access for taking them to the court. You need evidence. So there is a big problem, and multinational corporations, IT companies have not been very, you know, very open in this whole thing, and there are restrictions. And so we were told at one time that there is a special mechanism or a avenue under which we could talk to the government of US, and they would further talk. There is a process, and then those companies could very selectively open up this whole, you know, shall we say, code or whatever in that conversation. So there is, therefore, the issue is, on the one hand, you have the commercial interests of the multinational, because if they start sharing the code and they make it all open, etc., then clients will not sign up, because people value their privacy dearly. This is the $1 million question. Even we want privacy. We don't want everybody to snoop in. So this is a very, very important concern, not only for at a multinational corporation level, but even for everybody, for the clients. So this thing, therefore, the kind of tug of war, or the conflict between privacy and the need for security, the need for opening up some of these devices to make sure that the security is not compromised. Well, one mechanism is that, and the European community is doing it. I mean, they insist that, your question about data extraction, etc., they insist that the data relating to their population and their society, their communities, etc., should be on servers which are resident and based in their countries. They should not be foreign servers. So they have more control and they have access to these servers. So that is one way in which, you know, and I know this was brought up once. I was talking to an IT delegation. I had gone on a counterterrorism meeting to The Hague, and my colleague ambassador called me, and there was an IT delegation by NASSCOM in the, you know, at The Hague, Netherlands, and we had this whole thing. They were mentioning that they have this thing about the European community being very, very particular, that you know, they will not allow handling of the security from Bangalore or Pune. So the persons will have to come actually to Europe and handle the whole servers, etc. there. And they insist that, you know, there should be, so they will not allow the servers, they will not allow access to the server even from abroad. That's what I'm saying. So they want resident computing devices and housed in their particular physical territories. So you have more control. So that is one. The other thing, of course, is upgrading your technology. We have to buy the best technology, anti-piracy, anti-hacking, and we will even if we have to spend a few millions on our, you know, and we are very good. I mean, they already are there. We will have to maybe tie up with some, you know, top-notch computer security companies of the world, I would say, top-notch. And if we have to spend a few millions, well, I think it's an investment. Train our team. And there are a lot of people, for example, in the NTRO and the other, you know, entities in India. We have those already, but we'll have to upgrade even further, give them a full edge. We'll have to buy additional equipment, train our people to make sure that if there are people who are having inimical interests and who are trying to use and hack into our networks, etc., whether it is the foreign ministry or whether it's the government of India or whether it's banking, and which could actually bring the whole system to a halt, or you are using data, as you said, data extraction to forecast or maybe predict about the Indian personality, the Indian consumer tastes, and maybe even influencing them. You know, our preferences. What do the search engines do? When you do a search for buying or doing online shopping, your transaction doesn't end there. It's picked up by a foreign multinational, and it is being keyed into a particular artificial intelligence machine, and it is developing projections about the taste and preferences of people in Delhi, of people in Bangalore, what they are buying. And so then they will run advertising campaigns and do sales promotion based on your preferences of shopping. So this is how data extraction, can kind of can influence things. Now, it could also be used on a negative note for security and counterterrorism. When I was doing counterterrorism, you have the whole dark web. The biggest problem today, and that's why cryptocurrency has not been legitimized, bitcoins, etc. It's not been taken on board yet by so many nations because we don't know where the money has come from. They have gone beyond. They are not they are not transferring money from their account. For example, when you go and pick up a bank FD or sign up, buy a debenture, etc., or a debt instrument, etc., from the financial market, you will transfer that from your account. So there is a track, there is a trail. Where has that money come from? But in a Bitcoin, you don't know all that. So that is the problem. Now there is, on a similar note, there is the dark or the dark web. And I know when I used to go to New York on the sidelines of the UNGA, etc., for counterterrorism meetings, global, forum on counterterrorism, etc. And one of the things which was always mentioned was how the online channels are being used for money laundering. And money laundering, it's money from the criminal activities. And then these are being transferred to facilitators and operators in other countries and are being used for for terrorism. So again, the other issue, of course, is radicalization. The biggest problem today is terrorists are not just born like that. They are either economically deprived, they don't have enough avocation, they don't have enough livelihood, so they don't have recognition either at home or in the community or their nation. So an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So they get onto something, they want to do something, they feel significant and get recognition. So they become a lieutenant, they become a commander in one of these organizations. Then they feel that they are getting noticed, they have their picture, so they want to. That's how radicalization can take place. They are attracted to radicalization, and these are some of the currents which all go through the web. And so data and monitoring of all these trends, I think technology has to be used. So we have to have counter surveillance and monitoring of these trends. And we have our agencies which are very good at these things, but we need to always upgrade and participate with all the rest. So data extraction, yes, is a huge concern. Your entire existence. I sometimes talk to my peers and colleagues and other people and said, all of us today, Akrit and Ruchi, you know that all of us today have a virtual profile. We have our physical personality, and then we have a virtual personality. The social media we use, the Google searches we do, the shopping which we do. So we have Ravi Thapar, the professor, ex-diplomat, and we have Ravi Thapar, the virtual Ravi Thapar, who when he's interacting with the social media, maybe on LinkedIn or on WhatsApp, or through other emails or just doing plain research, through Taylor and Francis Group, etc. There is a digital profile which is also building up. So there's a virtual personality. So each one of us today, in terms of sci-fi or whatever artificial thing, we all have a digital personality. We all have a virtual personality besides our physical existence. So anyone who tampers that virtual personality, digital personality, which all of us have today, everybody who's using smartphones and internet, etc. If anyone tampers with that, influences that, and uses that knowledge to make negative, strategies or to influence our younger population, for example, to radicalize our population, or to bombast them, with wrong ideas, negative notions. That's what fake news is all about. That's what fake news is all about. So these are campaigns. So we have to guard against these. So we must invest in them. So that is the negative aspect of digitization. We are therefore opening up a new area, and we can be very vulnerable. We can be very, very vulnerable, and we can be just, and there are scandals. There are people who Photoshop your pictures, etc. There are scandals. There are people who can even get into today. In fact, you have even I'm forgetting the depositories, even stock exchanges, etc. You do this, you can do this through digital transfers. So they can also be immense financial losses. They can be immense personal losses, compromise of your reputation, etc. And so many embarrassing things, and also security. So yes, when we are getting into digitization era, we have to guard against all these things. And those are the negative aspects which we should also be careful about. But India is competent. We have a huge community of IT people, just that we should not let go, and it should not be short-term commerce. We have had examples of people compromising because of short-term gains. That should not influence us. There should always be the larger consciousness that all this is all temporary. We should not forget our spiritual lineage. We should not forget that at the end of this whole thing, I used to say it even to Arabic audiences, we are here for 80, 100 years, and maybe if you're very lucky, 120 plus or whatever. There's still not enough technology and scientific development on that, but that's about all. We all have to make sure that we live on a certain discipline and a structured basis. And we must think not only of ourselves, we must also think of our brethren, of our youngsters and our future generation. Therefore, the vision actually which should guide us, our leadership, etc., is not just based on this next 5 years, 10 years, etc. We have to understand, we have to temper it with a bigger vision, which is what it holds for our future generations. Are we taking our nation on a right path? Are we taking our children on the right path? Are we preparing, as we are in the Jindal Global University, are we preparing them to be global citizens? Because if you are a global citizen, you will be responsible. You will think of everybody. You're not just thinking of your particular house. You're not just thinking of your community. You're thinking of the whole world. And if you think of the world, if you think of the global population, automatically, I think we will get the blessings of Mother Nature. Because Mother Nature, of course, always thinks of her entire children. It will not think, Mother Nature is not just thinking of India. For Mother Nature, I think it's almost, Brazil is also important, Somalia is also important, Nepal is also important, Afghanistan is also important, Singapore is also important. We are all children of God, children of Mother Nature. We have to keep remembering and always connecting with another, aspect which India is very good at, which is spirituality. So that is one check which can hold us and give us balance. But of course, we have to do our duty. We have to be wonderful in IT techniques and be very guarded about vulnerability, because yes, data extraction can lead to a huge compromise in security, in finances, and in the privacy of our nation. Yeah.
So that was good. I think it is for us to acknowledge how positive technology has been. I think it's also, it's that necessary for us to understand the negative sides of it as well. But I think now, as we sort of near the end of this mind-blowing conversation, I think, to say the least, there's something that I've always been curious about personally, which for me I think is the right time to address. It's about another popular topic in the field of, say, digital economy meets IR. It's the establishment of the digital single market of the European Union, or the DSM, which is what it's commonly called. Now, since we see the EU as one of the largest markets in the world, how do you think this concept of the DSM might affect its interactions with other economies, say like India?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would say that we have to start preparing for it, preparing for this, because we will have to naturally be in sync with these processes. If we don't, we will lose out on some degree of trade opportunities. But I think we are good at these things. I really don't think that, this small little thing is going to hold us back. We are into supercomputing. I mean, we are into wonderful custom designing. We will give them the solutions. For all our software engineers are going to make those programs to make the digital market one integrated unit. So I don't see that really as a problem. The only thing is that we will have to share some of these techniques with our industry. We'll have to start doing the orientation, etc. And there's always a nascent period. There's a time, there's an orientation. We all have to go through this. And that culture of digital markets will have to gradually be built up. And I'm sure the big industrial houses, of course, will take care. They will have their own teams, S&T, research, HR, human resources teams, which will make sure that these forward manufacturers, big players in India connect with the EU digital market. They will make sure of this. But the important thing is some of our small and medium enterprises, they should also be able to participate. So actually at some point down the journey of time, etc., we will also ultimately graduate to these latest techniques. It's already happening in some ways. E-commerce, we don't have a digital market per se, but we have e-commerce. I mean, there's one lesser example prior to digital market. So virtual moving of assets, whatever, literally trading of assets and all that. This is going to be a future. I mean, cryptocurrency is not just about European digital market. It's about the world market. I mean, blockchain technologies are worldwide. It's not just so. If we can participate, a lot of our people, and there are Indian companies also which are specializing in that. The only thing is that you have to build up the culture. And I would again, I would say that we should keep abreast. We should not step back. We have to keep pace with the best in the world. I mean, we are a potential superpower. We are already a cultural, and I would say spiritually, philosophically, we are a very influential big power. We are an important economic nation, economic power also, and we are getting there. But in order to become, to have the full concomitants of a superpower, we will have to participate vigorously and fully in any, S&T exercise. And we are doing it already, and we must keep doing this. The only caution again is that at the same time, we should not neglect our impoverished millions. And we should make sure that, there is not too much of a divide, because that is when, dissatisfaction starts. Frustration starts. And mind you, I'm not just talking of that in India. The same concept applies abroad also. That's my lament, that at the UN, when we talk of sustainable development goals, similarly, there should be equitable distribution of wealth and opportunity with the lesser and the less fortunate nations. Because if that doesn't take place, then it is a restless world. And if there's a restless world, you take any corner of the world. When I handle counterterrorism, this is when extremism, radicalization, and all these wrong concepts start building up in young societies, and that's when they become extremists and terrorists, because they don't have other avenues. They are not into creative thinking. They don't have those channels where they are connecting with worldwide audiences, and they don't realize that human entity and human personality has another side to it, which is, as I said, that connect with Mother Nature. They don't understand these gentler and softer side of the human existence. Of course, India is wonderful at that. You don't have to be a millionaire. The Indian ascetic and the Indian sadhu and the Indian sage is able to just sit in one corner in the Himalayas, and he's able to achieve Buddha, Gautam Buddha. India is wonderful at that also. So you have this blessedness, I would say, as young icons, young people in our country. You have this wonderful lineage. I always say to young people in India, you're blessed with that wonderful capacity. You have some, I would say, some innate legacy and software with others don't. You are already blessed with that. So you can tune off. You have a safety channel. That's why India remains a moderate country. That's why we are more balanced. That's why we are able to go into international audiences and impress people, because we have that wonderful perspective. It tempers us down. It controls us, gives us balance. So just coming back to this whole thing where we started from is that I think we just need to make sure, we just need to keep sure that the digital markets, etc. I don't see that as an obstruction. No, no, sir. You'll see us. You'll see it being done in our country too. I don't see it as a problem. Our multinationals, our Indian corporates will connect with it. The important thing is that this must be shared also with our small, medium enterprises. They must also have the incentive and the opportunity and the feeling that they are not being neglected, because that is something which causes a lot of problems. There should be no divide. There should not be not just a digital divide. There should not be also an economic and financial divide, not only between our country people, but also between nations.
Right. I absolutely agree. So where you said that we must look after the economic and financial inequalities in the country as well while we are trying to improve our economy. Having said that, as we conclude this interview, I want to know. I mean, I want to ask for your concluding remarks on this topic, if you have anything for our audiences, and also for our students who will be viewing this. If you have any recommendations in terms of books or readings when it comes to economic diplomacy. I mean, we have pretty much covered all the aspects of it in this interview itself. Just for our students, if you would like to say something.
Yeah, no, economic diplomacy, I'll be very frank, is actually unfolding on a 24/7 basis every day. Uh, just keep abreast of latest, developments, UN, multilateral, our own foreign policy, clarifications, etc. And try not to develop biases. Try to keep an open mind. That is the most important thing. In any academic inquiry, a true academic is devoted to a 360 degrees vision. And anything which inputs into that vision should be taken into account. There should never be a preconceived bias or a notion, because if you do, you will never get to the truth. As I said, Mother Nature is cyclical and 360 degrees. It does not discriminate between anybody. We do. We have our biases, but not in the bigger realm of nature, no. I think that vision is already part of your DNA. I told you about your wonderful lineage. Indians, you don't have to listen to me. You just have to tune in and look at some of our books and scriptures, etc. You have that vision guiding the nation all the time. I mean, subconsciously. Maybe your parents who go, who practice a few things. It's a connect. Rituals, sometimes we do, whichever religion, Parsi, Buddhism, Sikh, Hindu, Christian, whatever. It's just a symbol of connecting with some old practice. This has been carried on for hundreds of years. It has a significance, so you're able to tune in and tune out. So I'd just like to say that coming back to one of my remarks, please retain a balance. When you are into mechanized gadgets and gadgetry and this wonderful thing, let's not have the situation which once I was joking with my wife. We were in a hotel late in the night, and she said, "You're stupid. You won't understand this. I'm going to send you a WhatsApp." So she's lying next to me in the bed. So she is not going to tell me how exactly this thing unfolds. So she said, "You're not going to study. You're not going to understand this. You're too disinterested. You're just in your own world. I'm just going to send you WhatsApp." So we have this thing about, seated next to each other or at the dining table. I remember once I was rebuked by my children. I mean, Dad, you're at lunch at someone's place and you're looking at your phone, So you're in a family gathering. These are significant when you're at lunch or dinner with your parents or your family, etc. It's important to be fully participating, and you're on your device, smart device. So we should not start disconnecting. We're connecting too much with the virtual world. That's already a danger. That's already an alarm in our personality. We cannot lose that balance, because the virtual world, unfortunately, is another infinite world. It's a realm which is there, which is almost real, but frankly, it is not actually real. There's a big physical entity which is outside the virtual world. And we should never lose track of that, because if we do, then we're going to become machines. And a machine is not a human being. The moment a human being becomes a machine, he will make mistakes. A machine can have a power failure. A machine can have a battery run down. A machine can perform erratically. Sometimes it gives you a peculiar reading. You had machines which give you peculiar readings, and you'll say, what the hell is wrong? So you have to give a human response. You have to give a balanced response. You have to not bias yourself. You have to keep abreast through machines, through digitization, but you have to retain an internal inner balance. And ultimately, as it has been said, there is a lot of wealth inside us. There is a lot of intuition inside us. There is a divine light inside us guiding all of us, and which runs the whole show. There's an energy which runs the whole show. So I think this is important. Economic diplomacy, other expertise, other fields, etc., is all a manifestation of internal excellence. There has to be internal, genuine excellence. Our commitment, our triest, our appointment, therefore, must be with internal and inner elegance. Not a sham, not a hypocrisy, but we must be genuine. If we are internally, excellent, if we are thinking good thoughts, if we are more pure, and we have a commitment and balance with Mother Nature, whatever, I think it will show in our personality. And once it shows in your personality, you will automatically be a very articulate, you'll automatically be a very capable person. I think you will have some, coming back again to Mother Nature, you'll have some blessings and benedictions, and you will do well. And mind you, I would say that is the energy. That, mind you, is the operating system. That is why Indian scientists, Indian community, Indo-Americans, Indo-Europeans, anywhere Indian professionals go, they are shining and doing very well. And I'm sure we are talking today in this interview, many of the audience people, many of you who are the JGU, you will be shining and you will be making us proud. And then people will be interviewing you and taking guidance from you. So I have the best sentiments about all of you. I compliment you, in fact, about this whole futuristic kind of, analysis which you have made in the Arthniti society in JJU. Again, this speaks volumes about the institution, Global, Jindal Global. I think it's an inspiring institution, and you have these inspirational, channels like your Arthniti. I compliment you that you could even think of these concepts, and you want to keep abreast, and you want to, dial in and synchronize, and you want to give small minds like myself, those boring bureaucrats like myself, come into the public and come and give you small time lectures, etc. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope it is of some interest to you, and some of the thoughts make sense. I've spoken a hell of a lot of things. I hope that it'll be of some benefit to you and your friends and colleagues in JGU and in the bigger community, at a bigger level in the student community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. I think this was, I didn't even notice the time go by, to be very honest. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for talking to us, sir.
Yeah. So you stopped the recording now? Has it been recorded? No. Okay. It's still going on. Yeah, it's fine. I enjoyed it. And as you saw, it was a lot of spontaneous thoughts. Sometimes I did meander and lose my track. And just once, I think I even had to come back to the question. I had to take help. But that's how, diplomat professors are. One is the diplomat who's been abroad in so many countries, lived with so many people, drunk water from so many seas, as it were. The other thing is being a professor. The academic world is so vast. When I meet people, counter professor, other colleagues in today in the academic world, my God, how talented, how knowledgeable, wonderful people. So I think you have a great opportunity. I think you will all do very well. Just keep track of what I said. That wonderful balance and inner connect and inner excellence is the way forward. That is the filter inside all of us. Whatever is coming from outside, external stimuli, whatever inputs you're getting from all over the world, there is an internal filtration system that it must go through. You have to internalize some of these experiences and check them out. And don't have to agree. Don't agree with me. I give you the full right. You have the right as everybody on the planet to differ. You don't have to accept things which don't, which don't impress you. Submit it to your internal processes. Submit it to your internal filter system. And once you learn to do that, always, you will only keep the best. You will not keep the dregs. You will filter it out. And once you filter it out, you will feel light and you will feel ebullient and you will feel good and you will deliver excellence. You will deliver distilled water when you speak anywhere or you write anywhere, and you'll be the best student and the best professional. That's my final word.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So, yeah, I think we've run out, is it?
We would like to conclude the interview here. Thank you again for. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're having a network problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying like, thank you, sir, for this enlightening conversation.
Yeah.
And we would like to conclude the interview here. Thank you so much again. And once this video goes out, I'm sure all our audiences and our viewers will feel the same way. Thank you so much again, sir.
Thank you for sharing your time with me and giving me an opportunity, giving a little interesting time to a boring academic or a retired civil servant. So when it goes on the air, please let me know. And I like